All right, so as Roger mentioned, my name is Seana Day, and I'm a partner with the Mixing Bowl and Better Food Ventures. And I'm delighted to have this panel this afternoon. I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation, kind of tracking food throughout the food system here, from grower to processor to marketer and CPG. So I'd like to first start off by introducing Jennifer. Jennifer, and what I'm going to do is ask each panelist to talk a little bit about who they are and what they do, and then why they're here today. I know some of the faces on the panel are familiar. I'm delighted to also see 4 Central Valley, including myself, participants, which is unusual for a Silicon Valley panel. But yeah, a little bit about yourselves and why you're here today, sort of what's interesting about this conference and this topic for you individually.
All right, well, is this on? There we go. Okay, well, thank you, Seana, for having me here today. I think, so to introduce myself, Jennifer Hebets, I work with Mars Incorporated, and specifically I work with the Mars Advanced Research Institute. And so that is a group within Mars Incorporated that focuses on developing applied and fundamental research across multiple scientific disciplines. But we are really the function within the enterprise that helps the business continuously look forward out on the horizon in terms of what are innovations in a multitude of scientific fields that could help the business continue to be innovative, mitigate risks that we see coming up in the future. We are a group that liaises with all the segments in the business. So, Mars is a company that does over $30 billion in revenue a year, 80,000 associates or employees worldwide. So we have a host of brands far beyond what you know of Snickers and M&Ms and Skittles, everyone's favorite candies, I'm sure. But we also have a multitude of pet care brands, pet care hospitals as well. So we're constantly helping all of our counterparts in the R&D departments in all of those businesses to really look forward into the future and innovation, as well as leveraging a wide network of innovators around the world. So, yeah.
Thanks, Jennifer. Brad Gleason, you're next.
Sure. My name is Brad Gleason. We are a custom farming company that is located on the western side of the San Joaquin Valley. Farm mostly pistachios, some almonds. Previously, we've been in the row crop business, cantaloupes and cotton and sugar beets and all that stuff. But we now are primarily focused in permanent plantings along the west side and a little bit down in Arizona as well.
Jonathan Hoff.
My name is Jonathan Hoff. I'm the CEO of Monte Vista Farming Company. We're a grower, packer, and shipper of California almonds located in downtown nowhere, Denair, California. It's on the east side of the valley, just southeast of Modesto. I'm here as both a grower and a processor. And I mentioned we're a grower and a packer, but I'm interested to see some of the new technology that's focused on packing. I was really glad to see that this panel was going to address midstream packers and downstream as opposed to just farmers. So I'm here to see some of the new innovation in that respect.
And Curtis.
So Curtis Garner, represent a large farm in Central California. It's about 10,000 acres. We do irrigated row crops, primarily Pima cotton to processing tomatoes. Coming to this organization was a bit of trying to figure out how are we going to survive? It's a matter of life and death for us. And so what is the innovation that's coming down the pipe? How can I help to reduce my costs, and how can I influence the top line as well? And so that was what I was hoping to find here.
Great. So I'm going to start with a question that's maybe a little bit of a fun question. And feel free to use specific names or not. You can give examples. But I'd love to hear from each one of you something that you've seen in the last couple of months that really excites you in the technology, whether it's food or ag technology, and something that you think, well, maybe it's neat, but that's not really going to have a lot of application in my business. Maybe that sort of technology or that type of solution is missing the mark. So let's start there, something kind of broad, and then we'll dig in deeper. And I'll start with Curtis. We'll start down there.
Well, there's a couple that have been exciting and have not delivered, right? I mean, drones is one of them that everybody kind of in the room, it's kind of hit its hype cycle and hasn't really had a value proposition. I think the value proposition's coming. The market's maturing for that. And the other one's farm management information systems. There's a huge long-term value for that. There's a bunch of people kind of taking a crack at it, but nobody's really solved it, and so it's really undelivered for me.
We'll just come down the...
Yeah, so I'm really excited about some of the yield forecasting and yield monitoring technology out there, not only from a grower perspective, but also from a marketer's perspective. One of the most challenging things that we deal with is understanding what we're going to have available to market before it's in the barn. And so from a sales perspective, it would be awesome to know what's actually out on the tree or in the orchard in June or July when we start marketing the crop. We don't harvest until mid-August, and oftentimes we don't know what's available to sell until it's all been processed, which sometimes doesn't happen until January. So I'm really excited about companies like Vinsight, for example, but then also some of the automated QC technology that's out there. There's a company called Qcify that we work with, and they build a machine that will detect. We have electronic sorters that detect specific defects in our product, and then they eject it. I've been saying for a while it'd be awesome if we just had a machine that would detect the defects and just tell us how many there are. Sit on a bench so that we can put a sample through and have it spit out the percentage of chip and scratch and broken and rancid and all that kind of stuff, and Qcify's nailed that. So I'm really excited to see that develop.
Great.
I think there are a couple. One, water is such a huge component of what we're in need of, and there is legislation that's been passed regarding the ability to pump water. And so we've been equipping our water wells with pressure transducers that will measure what our pumping levels are, and if the well is off, what our standing water level is. In addition to when the well is on, how many gallons a minute we're pumping. This is going to be very important down the road for this legislation. The acronym is SIGMA, but it is something that's going to affect every farmer that is involved with a water well. I think the other one that is interesting, it's a company called Semios, and it has traps that are out in the almond orchards, and it literally takes pictures of the counts that we have for moths that are in there, and it also transmits a scent for mating disruption in the navel orange worm, and we tried it last year, had a lot of success in terms of not necessarily needing to spray as often, or at least being able to do it with accurate timing. So there are some really interesting things that are out there for growers to take a look at as they farm.
Well, for Mars, given that we don't, with few exceptions, we really don't do direct commercial scale farming, and we really rely on our suppliers for all of our key ingredients. That said, we are heavily invested in new technologies and innovations in the ag space, because the improvements in efficiencies upstream affect us just as much as everyone else in the supply chain. So for us, some of our key crops are crops that are grown outside the United States. Things like cocoa, for example. And what's really exciting for us is taking bits and pieces of lots of new technology out there and seeing how it can be applied to crops that are virtually have not been modernized. Cocoa is a very little understood crop from a modern agronomic perspective. And so we're actually increasingly able to apply advanced analytical capabilities and automatically gather data in crops that are traditionally grown in emerging markets, and apply advanced computational modeling and AI to the way some of these non-traditional crops are grown. So there's a long ways to go, but it's really interesting.
Great. So in one of the panels before the lunch break, my partner Rob Trice was moderating an automation and labor panel. And I think Rob put me on the spot, as a matter of fact, during that panel. And so now it's my turn to kind of circle back and give him the response that he was looking for. But I think a lot of us spend time thinking about automation in the field, robotics in the field, adoption, what's driving it, what's not. I'm curious, Jonathan, how are you on the handler side, and there might be others on the panel that can also talk to this, but how are you thinking about automation and robotics in your operations, and how is that kind of evolving over time?
Yeah, in the processing plant, we're focusing heavily on automation. We're building a new processing line right now that's going to have about 15% of the labor that we have on our other packing lines, and it's really just driven by economics. The cost of labor is increasing so rapidly. 5 years ago, the cost of or the payback on an electronic sorter, for example, that costs about $750,000 was, it was 6 or 7 years. Well, now if you utilize that thing at 100%, it's 3.6 months. And so, the same goes with PLC-controlled processing lines and remote analytics and all that kind of stuff. Those used to be things that Okies like me just didn't pay attention to because they were so costly, and we would throw labor at problems that we needed to fix. Well, that's just not an option for us anymore. And so we're investing in electronic sorters, robotic packing, pallet conveyance, you name it, it all makes sense for us now.
Right. Anybody else looking at automation outside of the field that?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of on our farm, we have a good base of workers. It's kind of a bimodal population, so we have a group of older gentlemen that are looking at about that retirement age, and we have a bunch of 21-year-olds. And the 21-year-olds aren't replacing the old guys at the rate that we need them to. And there's no new labor force coming in. And so we're going to be forced to mechanize. That mechanization couldn't come fast enough for us, and so we're heavily investing, looking into technologies to automate the hand processes, things like weeding and cultivating of fields, remote sensing. There's kind of a convolution of sensors and technology and computation that's kind of hitting that peak to where these things are going to come together and make sense, and the economics are going to make it viable. Just got back from a Hanover Massey conference where it's Industry 4.0, and seeing the automation in factory side is just, it's amazing. The things like cobots, augmented reality, it's here. It's going to get applied into the farm within a shorter time frame than people think.
Right. So one of my favorite charts that I've seen in the last year is created by Wells Fargo and their economic development, or their economic chief economist, and it sort of shows the value of food over the course of the last couple of decades and how much people actually pay for food. And the farm gate value just kind of ticks along, slowly rising. But what's fascinating about this graphic is that the value add and marketing piece of the total pie in terms of how much we're paying for food has exploded over the last couple of decades. And I wonder if each of you can maybe talk for a second about how does that matter in your business? How do you capture that? Especially on the farming side, when you see all of this value being created and paid for through marketing and value add, yet the farm gate value just kind of slowly ticks along. How do you approach a business model such that you can kind of capture some of that?
I'll take a first crack at it. And so on our farm, like I said, it's a matter of survival. And so we're kind of looking at this, the value chain is there. How do we get more direct to the consumer? The consumer loves our story, loves our brand, doesn't know it necessarily because we as a farmer, we get middled quite often by packers and shippers, not speaking ill of it, to necessary and a viable business model. But how do we kind of go direct to consumer? How do we get the middlemen out kind of the way? I was excited to meet a gentleman here that does an online trading platform to ship commodities international. And so things like that I think are going to be disruptive and exciting, and it's how can we at the farm gate grab some more of that value?
Well, I was just going to say, we have a brand for the pistachios and the almonds. It's a very competitive market, though, and some of these commodities are difficult to differentiate yourself, and it comes down to price oftentimes. And there are some, 800-pound gorillas in the industry that are going to be very difficult to dislodge. At the same time, buyers don't want to be just locked into one or two particular places, so there's some room there, but it's highly competitive. I can say that from our end.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I would say that's definitely an important question for a branded company like Mars that does derive a lot of value from the value of our brands and the marketing out there, and knowing that you do have this global crisis with one of our key ingredients in cocoa, knowing that most cocoa farmers live in poverty, and the majority of cocoa comes from West Africa and South America, where cocoa's grown on small plots, and it's barely provides a basic living standard for cocoa farmers. And so Mars is incredibly committed to ensuring that the supply chains that we invest in are generating viable livelihoods for all of the actors across our supply chains. We're actually doing pretty extensive work to help our cocoa farmers improve their yields and their on-farm productivity, so that they're able to capture the most value possible out of the supply chain. And we're also doing a lot of work to analyze what exactly is a viable living wage. That's so context specific, but we're really committed to understanding what that means quantitatively in each context, so that we can commit to making sure that all the actors in our supply chain are able to live viable livelihoods.
Well, first I'll suggest to Brad and Curtis that they should work with a top-notch processor/marketer for their AMA needs. But really, our model is we've sort of deviated from the traditional model within California. Matter of fact, we like to tell our growers' stories to our customers. We actually take our growers with us on trips, and we have them sit down with some of our customers, and we work together to understand what the customers need, so that our growers can create and capture more value in the field. Because we've been able to do that, we've been able to not only get a higher and better return back to our growers than some of our competitors, but we also think strategically about what their objectives are, and we work towards achieving those objectives, not just our own. And so we've seen tremendous growth by doing that, and it's ultimately just being super transparent, as opposed to hiding behind the veil that processors always have, the veil that exists between end user and grower, so that we can work all of our smoke and mirrors.
Right. So one of the areas that I often hear startups sort of talk about, and that's adoption in the field, and how do we get growers to adopt our technology? And it's not happening fast enough, and investors are saying it's not happening fast enough. And it sort of occurs to some of the folks now that are looking at this ecosystem in a pretty deep way, what role the sort of processors, the midstream, the value add businesses can have in helping stimulate the adoption of technology in the field. I'm wondering if each of you sort of have some insight, some thought there in terms of your ability or your company's ability to help communicate the value of technology adoption to the growers, such that maybe the sale becomes a little bit more frictionless for those entrepreneurs that are looking to sell technology into the food and ag value chain. Jennifer, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'd love to take a stab at that. I think that as an end retailer, introduction of new technology in the ag supply chain for us has to be done through these midstream processors, or for us, our suppliers and our brokers and whatnot. And so, to the extent that we're committed to helping the industry improve and gain efficiencies, we can't do it alone. We really do rely on our suppliers to adopt that technology, or on the growers. And so I think the key to overcoming that hurdle is really, innovators have two real hurdles. One exists as the competition. It's an increasingly competitive area. And the other one is the status quo. And so for us as a manufacturer, if we are to make a purchase or an investment in some sort of new technology, we're looking at what is the competing technology out there, and what's the opportunity cost of just doing things the way they've always been done, because we've been around for a couple generations. And so I would really recommend that the new innovations really do need to be developed in partnership, and there's always sensitivities to, protecting your IP and not wanting to divulge too much information. But if you can offer a product that fits directly into a need of your client, or fits directly into a processing, a manufacturing process, or a supply operation, that has to be developed hand in hand in conjunction with your client. And so that's how the sales get made, I think.
I think on our end, we're not seeing too much from the processors, both the pistachio and the almond side, although I can see where food traceability is going to be something that is going to be more and more of an issue, and I think there will be technologies out there to try and capture what it is that we're doing in the field before it reaches the plant. Some of the vendors, I know there are fertilizer companies that have certain applications that they're offering as part of, if you're a customer of one company or another, that they'll provide that. I think growers, they don't want to be locked into something just because you've offered us this app. There may be another company that we want to continue to do business with or do some business with. And so I think part of the trick there is just not locking somebody in if they do happen to have that technology available.
Yeah, I mentioned this on the panel last year. Growers are traditionally a tough sell, and so as packers, I think it's part of our responsibility to help them understand the value that some of this tech creates. And oftentimes, that's a result of our interaction with end users, right? And so whether it's food safety related or traceability related, or having the ability to better time markets, whatever it is, it makes a lot more sense as packers if we can provide that to our growers as a service and leverage that into additional value for them, rather than having them as individuals make investments on their own without understanding how they're going to create and most importantly capture more value.
Yeah, so in a previous life, I actually worked for a midstream processor, one of the largest tomato processing facilities, as an ag operations manager, and I was just key in developing new technologies, and have seen things kind of switch from companies wanting to do things themselves and be proprietary to more partnership-oriented collaboration. There's grower communities that are going into coalitions like the strawberry industry. They're doing things. Us as growers haven't done a good job at organizing ourselves, but there's different institutions that we pay into that do fund interesting research. In tomatoes, it's like the CTIR, the California Tomato Research Institute. The Almond Board does some really interesting things and has a nice sized budget. And so there's different ways to kind of go at these different selling into the solution. The processors are a little bit more high tech. They're going to adopt a little faster, but I wouldn't be afraid to go talk to the farmer. Our farm, we partner with all kinds of different companies, from large multinationals to NGOs to startups, and do different tests on the farm. So it's really, farming's a relationship business, and so warm introductions really help. And so it's kind of beating down the doors and finding that 6 degrees of separation to get to the meaningful talk.
Okay, so now we're going to play a little game. I'd like each one of you to sort of think about your operation in the next 5 or 10 years, and think about the role, some process, some activity, some role that you'd love to see, or that you think it's coming, that technology is going to transform that. And maybe a different part of your business that really, it's unlikely that we're going to see a lot of sort of change from a technological standpoint. I don't know, maybe you can think of that, but really sort of how do you see technology transforming your operation, in 5 years out, 5-10 years out? And you can be specific about a process or something.
Well, I'd like to see you pay us more in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll tell you one of the things that I see that could revolutionize our industry and provide more transparency and ultimately yield more value to growers, and that's a radical shift in the way we market. We don't have a board of exchange. We don't have an index that we market product on. It's all very transactional. And as packers, we're all competing with one another to get the highest and best price back to our growers, and often that means selling products to our customers when it's the worst time to buy. So we're not partnering with them to help them expand their consumer base and all that kind of stuff. Well, we're working with a firm now to sort of develop a marketing platform that would provide transparency both to end users, packers, and also growers to help make better, more informed decisions and to take some fluctuation or volatility out of our market. And the whole idea is, as we have this ever-expanding production, to help open up new markets, to generate more demand at the consumer level, to absorb this massive amount of production that we have coming, all at a higher price.
Well, so one thing that I think the trick is trying to combine all this different sensor technology into one place, and also correlating, what's the impact on yield if we apply, that information from a particular technology, what's the cost of doing that, what's the yield response, and ultimately what's the value of that commodity, and does it pay for it? And any of the salespeople you talk to, it's always, well, my solution is what made the difference. And of course, it's not always just one thing, but it's correlating yield to these particular activities. And so, we know, for instance, weather has an impact. We need a certain number of hours below 45 degrees in the wintertime for the tree to go to sleep and gain dormancy and so forth. If we don't have that chill, we're not going to have the yield the following year. So we know there's a correlation between yield and tracking that weather, but there's also correlations for the amount of water you apply, the amount of fertilizer you apply, the amount of B-flat hours during bloom for the almonds, all these different things. But if we can figure out a way to correlate each of those into one sort of a predictive analytics, that's where I kind of see things going. And right now we're in, capturing that data, but down the road, I do think there are going to be some pretty good models out on that.
Curtis, and then we'll go to Jennifer.
Yeah. So for me, kind of the dream would be that the way it is now, the grower packer shipper, we're not enemies. It's a symbiotic relationship. We're all in the same business, providing products and value to each other. And so what I'd like to see is kind of the data interoperability between the two places, because as a farmer, next year I don't know what I'm going to grow. I don't know what's going to be the most profitable mix for my farm. I have a certain rotation that I have to hit for different deficiencies and nutrients that get taken from the soil by different crops. But it's like really guessing at what's going to give me my best return. And so doing different value proposition ads with teaming with marketers to grow a certain bit and tell our story and get a higher price. But, how can we see total world production on certain commodities and try to really gain the most efficient use of land for kind of everybody in the best return? And I see a big partnership coming to farmers and producers in the data interoperability and sharing information. I mean, it's going to be a piece of the puzzle for us to feed, 9.7 billion people in the next few years.
I think the biggest change that we certainly hope is coming and that we are working towards is applying all of these technologies to crops that haven't benefited from the green revolution thus far. And I think that's going to be made possible through better analytical capabilities and ability to handle massive amounts of data and do predictive modeling and do it faster. I think, that's my main prediction.
So for all of the entrepreneurs in the room, you heard it here first. These are some of the things to focus on. So speaking of entrepreneurs in the room, I'm going to ask one more question and then we can open it up. I think we've got 10 minutes left for Q&A. But guys, be ruthless about this one. What advice would you give budding entrepreneurs about selling into the food and ag value chain? And what are some red flags? What are some things that you've seen that you turn around and say, gosh, we're never going to buy from that company? So just kind of give the entrepreneurs in the audience a little bit of sort of real life feedback in terms of the buying of technology.
Yeah, so what I've seen work on our farm is come in and be humble and don't oversell and underdeliver. Do the opposite. That's kind of the best way for us.
Yeah, I'd agree. As Curtis mentioned earlier, the ag community is very relational. It's relationship driven. And if you say you're going to do something, do it. Follow up with an email. Make sure you answer the phone call if I've got a question or whatever. And phone calls work. We don't always just text. We don't always just email. Sometimes I want to ask some questions and I want you to pick up the phone and form a relationship with me. Partner with me. That's what I'm looking for.
I think that, sometimes there's a tendency to come to market too early, and, for us to have a virtual product or imagine what it might look or something like that, we're very busy, and when it's ready, that's the time to come knocking. And I think the other trick is, it may require some experimental period there where, there's 30 days of free trial, or, we'll try it on 10 acres and compare it against, if it's really going to make a difference against something else on the ranch. That's our tendency, is to give people test plots where we might try their product if they have an established track record, and there are people we can call and kind of verify. Otherwise, if it's in that stage, wait until it can really do something for the farmer, and then don't expect that you're just going to sign up the entire ranch overnight.
I'd say for us, the two most effective routes are either partner really early on with the big company so that you can develop your technology that will specifically cater to the needs of that company. If you don't want to go that route, wait until you can prove that you can scale.
Great. Questions from the audience? You've got a great group of panelists up here, so if you've got questions, this is the time to ask. Yes.
Master and I'll wait for the mic.
Thank you. This question is maybe more to Curtis, but any one of you who would like to answer that. I'm wondering, it may not be directly related to the immediate topic that we're discussing, but are you at all facing any issues by the implications of the automation that is happening in the farms, specifically about the labor issues?
We're facing labor issues as far as in where we have shortages and we're paying higher pricing. But as far as what I think your question is asking, more directly towards like the automation of threat to
That's right.
our
job
workers.
Displacement. Yeah.
Right, to job displacement. And so we actually, we view that kind of opposite. We'd like to adopt the technology. We have a ton of great workers, and we're going to continue to employ those individuals. And we'd like to pay them more and have them do higher value tasks. And so if automation comes in and takes 12 jobs away, our farm's not going to be laying 12 people off. We want to retrain and retask and provide higher value on the farm. Our farm, we don't want anybody to ever have a ceiling, and want them to be able to continue to add value. There's a ton of opportunity. There's a ton of other laterals and things that we can do to retask individuals.
Great. And are you finding that retraining is feasible?
I am. So where there's going to be a big lack in this market is going to be in implementation. And so I see our farm is going to be a bright light and a training ground where other farmers are going to steal our people once they're kind of trained up. And so we're going to be kind of the breeding ground for the next mechanics and that type. And so it is going to be what it's going to be.
Thank you.
Yes.
Modeling at all to match your availability with the sales? That's always an issue for growing. You're growing not enough or you're growing too much. How do you manage that other than predictive modeling, which is kind of tough to do?
It's kind of hard to answer your question because we grow 12 different crops, and so there's all kinds of different timing and modeling issues. So I'm not, maybe you want to clarify it a little bit more for me and I can give a better answer?
I guess it's one thing to have the availability, but once you have all that availability, how do you know that you've got, the buyers and the distributors for that availability?
On some crops, it's contracted, right? And so we know the exact tonnage and price. Some things is actually spot on the market on the day, cannabis watermelons, and so we may not run that day because it's just not worth it. And so it's really volatile. It's up and down, and it's pretty difficult to manage and plan.
So in those kinds of days, what do you do with the extra crops?
It actually, coals can get discs under, left in the field. We're working with several companies to try to figure out how to make the economics work to get the coals out of the field. That's not only just kind of on the field level, but also on the packing level. So I'll just give you a quick example about fresh market tomatoes. So probably 17 to 40% is going to be left in the field, and then once it gets to the factory, another 30 to 40% of that's going to be cold and wasted. And so there's a huge opportunity for somebody to kind of figure this out. There's 3 or 4 companies that I know of that are doing something, but it's the economics. Nobody can really get us the economic answer.
Can you on those numbers, so from what you're planting and growing, what % do you think actually ends up out there in the market?
Off those numbers, probably, I don't know, 20% is what, like napkin math in my head.
You're selling about 20% of what you grow?
Yeah, probably.
Wow.
So we have time for one quick question right up here in front.
Jonathan, this is a question for you. You mentioned about one of the top challenges for you is market. Wondering if you could.
This question is for Jonathan. You mentioned that one of the top challenges you have is marketing. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit. Is it more connecting directly farm to consumers, or is it more market information that help you to decide what portion of crops you're going to build next year, or what specifically? Because a lot of technology available, and if we could understand a bit more, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, in the almond industry, and by the way, I'm saying almond. What I mean is almond. Where I come from, we say almond. Yeah, so in case you were wondering what we process. Yeah, so in the almond industry, we've got an extremely good problem, and that's that we've got far more demand than supply to fill it. And when I talk about marketing issues, it just means that so many of the marketing relationships that we have, or every sale that we complete, is it's all transactional, right? It's not very transparent. And because of that, there's a lot of volatility in the market. You know, massive swings up and down, which create nightmares and headaches for growers, but also can lead to credit defaults and so forth on the back end, and open us up to a tremendous amount of risk. And so in that respect, we're working, like I said, with a company to develop a platform that will help to put more transparency in the market, right? So that we don't have one guy doing one thing, another guy doing the other thing, and having this massive fluctuation in market pricing. As far as marketing our growers' story, or connecting our growers with consumers, I think there's some opportunity for tech to improve what we're doing there. As I mentioned, we take our growers with us on the road and fly them to Japan and sit down with our customers, or go to Europe with them and sit down with our customers there, so that our growers can understand what the customer needs, and the customer can understand what's realistic with respect to providing a product that meets their expectations. Where we're really failing, I think, is telling the story, and really getting our growers' story out there about all of the cool stuff that they're actually doing. You know, on a wide scale, growers in California are very, very progressive, and most consumers don't understand the realities of production in California and how sustainable we actually are, because we're not necessarily doing a good job in relaying that to our customers, so they can use that story in their marketing to the consumer.
Would everybody please join me in thanking this panel? Guys, that was great. Thanks very much.